Hello and welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio News. It's our weekly roundup of some of the stories that are making headlines here in northern Michigan. And joining me at the table this week, John Flesher from the Associated Press. John, thanks for coming back. And Pat Sullivan from the Northern Express. Pat, good to see you again as well.
Good to see you.
Thank you guys for being with us this week. Let's start over with John and one of the stories that we both have done, well, all three of us actually have done a little bit with over the years, but most recently you've been covering the story of the pipeline up in the Straights area, running near the Mackinac Bridge. There's some concern. The Land Use Institute here in Traverse City is taking this up as a issue that they want to draw attention to in recent weeks, but it's also getting some attention in the nation's capital by way of senators and representatives.
Correct. There's this pipeline, oil pipeline that runs under the Straits is owned by the Enbridge Energy Company based out of Canada, and the pipeline actually originates there, but once it crosses into the U.S., right up in the northeast corner of North Dakota, it comes down through Minnesota and Wisconsin. A line called Line 5 cuts over from Wisconsin and through the Upper Peninsula, and then ducks down beneath the Straits of Mackinac, where it divides into two lines, and on the other side turns back into one line and goes on into Canada, taking the oil to be refined. What has drawn attention to this line was, of course, the very tragic spill that took place on the Kalamazoo River back in 2010.
Also Enbridge?
Correct, another Enbridge line. And so people began to wonder, this line under the Straits of Mackinac, a lot of people don't even know it exists. It's just been there for a long time. It was laid in 1953, back when Eisenhower was president. And so the question is, well, how is it doing? And the National Wildlife Federation did a fairly extensive report on it back in 2012, and they had some real concerns about it, although Enbridge says that they do inspect it regularly and that it's fine. There's no reason to replace it, as some people want. Now, the pace has begun to pick up a little bit recently. In recent months, several members of Congress, including Michigan Senators Levin and Stabenow, have asked the federal government, the Pipeline Safety Administration that deals with pipelines, to answer some questions about it. How safe is it really, and what can you tell us? And the agency has responded and said that they believe that it is safe at this point, and they're keeping an eye on it. But that's where the debate is at this point. Now, just recently, Enbridge signed a contract with Michigan Tech University and purchased a very high-tech little underwater robot that resembles about a 7-foot-long missile. And it's very light and very speedy, and it will be just bristling with high-tech equipment. And they're going to be conducting, Michigan Tech will, a number of inspections of this pipeline, sonar inspections, where they can take very detailed measurements not only of the line but also the field, sediment field on either side of it, just to see what shape it's in. And hopefully that, along with the interior inspections that they conduct, will give them a better picture of what's going on with it.
The concern that was brought up to me by the Land Use Institute was basically that, we saw the catastrophe that happened in Kalamazoo, and now we're talking, of course, about the Straits, which could, in theory, be exponentially greater in terms of environmental damage.
Yes, true enough. If indeed you had the kind of leak that you had on the Kalamazoo River, the damage could be quite extensive. And we all know at this time of year what the Straits are like. They're covered with very thick ice, and so if there were a rupture now, it would be a very difficult proposition to get the oil cleaned up. And so this is one of those situations where you don't want to find out how bad it could be. All the emphasis is on prevention and making sure that it doesn't happen. And the question is, how do you accomplish that?
The other half of that equation too, and I honestly I don't know the legitimacy of this because I don't recall the Kalamazoo story, but the Land Use Institute was saying there were some 15 to 19 hours of where this leak in Kalamazoo had kind of gone undetected. Does that ring a bell with you?
It does. I don't remember the exact number of hours, but it was basically overnight after the leak had begun. And the control room in Canada just misinterpreted the information that it was getting, and they did not understand the magnitude of what was going on until it was discovered locally. I believe it was a Consumers Energy truck that was in the area that the driver smelled the oil and was able to get in contact with the company and let them know. But yes, there was a very long lag time, and a lot more oil leaked during that period. So yes, it was a human error situation, and one more reason for concern.
Any official response from Enbridge that you know
Yes,
of?
they have said, I have spoken with them, others have, and repeatedly they have said that they're certainly aware of the fragile nature of the straits, sure. And they keep a very close eye on the pipeline. They conduct the inspections both externally and internally. There are little tiny devices that can be used. They call them pigs, and they actually go up inside the line and can inspect for any kinds of cracks or defects, and so they do that on a regular basis, and they have underwater remote vehicles that inspect the exterior, and so they seem confident that it's okay.
That it's working. Pat, you said you covered this story a couple of years ago.
I think about a year ago. There was it was after the report had come out, and there was about a year ago. There was a lot of activity before. I think in the spring they had a fairly large demonstration at the Straits in St. Ignace.
Yeah. Does it? I don't know. Does it surprise you to know that not a lot of people still know about this? What are we, 60 years later?
Well, I suppose that is just an indication that there hasn't been a problem thus far that anyone knows about. But the line is very unobtrusive. You know, there's just a little marker over on the St. Ignace side of the Straits that shows where it goes up begins to go under the water, and the water is, for the most part, is obviously quite deep there, and so the two lines sit along the bottom in a very quietly, and so I think it's one of those situations where often until there is a problem, you just don't hear about it, and that's, I guess, what in a sense what makes this unusual. With the line 6B that ruptured, I suspect that very few people knew where it was exactly, may have been only vaguely aware, if at all, that it was there. And now, of course, they're aware of it. And in this case, some of the activist groups have been proactive, if you will, and wanting to call attention to it because they're concerned that something could happen. There apparently have been some leaks from that line up on the land portion, and so it's a matter of trying to get ahead of things.
I think that's what this is about. Why each year for the last couple of years since the Kalamazoo spill, these groups that are watching it, the environmental groups that are concerned about it, they want to come up with reasons to get people like John to write about it, to get other people to write about it, so that more and more people know about it. Because otherwise, it would be easy just to, let's say, 60-year-old line. It would be easy just to let it
ignore it,
let it go.
Pat, let's talk about your story from this past week in the Northern Express newspaper. We had a chance to read about the Microbrew, the brewery industry here in Northern Michigan. You talked with a couple of different folks who are making some unusual brews.
Yeah, it's something that I noticed in talking to different people about beer in the area, and something that over the last, we've got such a rich culture of beer making right now in Northern Michigan. It's actually developed and matured to the point where there's a couple of different camps of different kinds of philosophies that are behind the brew making, and there's numerous examples on either side. But for example, the ones that I focused in on, Shorts and Bel Air, are known for trying to be as creative as possible and trying to come up with new recipes and make beer as hoppy as possible. And some people find that challenging to drink. Right Brain in Traverse City is like that. Like, they brew a beer, one that they're going to release in April. They put a pig's head and pig parts in the vat.
I saw that, the Mangalista pigs.
Yeah. And apparently, and so, you know, if you're vegetarian, you probably think you're safe with beer, but not all beer.
Not necessarily. And that actually, as you pointed out in your article, brought some federal government employees knocking on the door.
Yeah, well, all of a sudden you've got a different process that they're using that actually probably needs to be monitored to protect human health. I mean, you're talking about animal carcasses going into the food stream, and so there they are, the FDA knocking on the door of a brewery because they've broken from tradition so severely that it probably needs to be looked at. How are they handling the food that they're putting into the beer? Right Brain is probably making some of the weirdest beers. I mean, they try to put pies in beers. They have a beer based on asparagus. The other side of that equation is, I think, in reaction to that, you've seen grow up these microbreweries that have decided to embrace brewing traditions from Europe that are hundreds of years old. And so when you go into a place like the Workshop in Traverse City or Stormcloud in Frankfurt, you see them like using local ingredients and maybe putting their own twist on it because of local ingredients, but fairly seriously adhering to the recipe for a Saison or the recipe for a triple. In the case of Stormcloud, they focus on Belgian beer. In the case of Workshop in Traverse City, they have an array of beer, but it's all, when you look up at their menu on the board, you recognize the kind of beers that they're serving. It's not that they've got a great variety and they've got beer that you wouldn't normally be able to find in Michigan, but it's all connected to those European recipes. And I thought that was interesting that there's these two different groups there now. And it's such a contrast to what it was like, say, in the early 90s when you went into a bar, and probably anywhere in the U.S., but I was in Traverse City then, and around Michigan, there were no choices.
I was going to say you had your
Budweiser, Bud Light,
Coors. Yeah, that was about it.
Yeah.
One thing that kind of fascinated me about your article was the instance of the FDA coming to Traverse City to check in on what these guys were doing, and their attitude about it was great. It's probably, like you said, something that does need to be looked at, and I expected when I read that for them to be like, oh, great, here
More
we go,
regulation.
federal government trying to get involved, but they weren't like that.
No, they were. I think Right Brain's reaction was really appropriate and really level-headed. Like they are taking a cut-up pig and putting it into a vat to make beer, and so you've got to. And I haven't tasted that, by the way. Have you tasted it?
No. Is that like a bacon flavor, or do you have any idea what we're going?
Well, I guess
after
it doesn't taste like pork, but it tastes smoky.
Okay. I was going to ask you too how much of the taste testing came along with this story assignment.
A lot of the interviews, however it worked out, I was doing a lot of the interviews in the morning, so I had to wait until the weekend to
come back and try again.
Taste some of the beer.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
I have to wonder. I wondered for some time about the more we read about the craft breweries sprouting up in this area. Are we going to reach a saturation point at any time? Is there a point where there's going to be too many of these to make it a go of it? What's your impression of that?
I think that we'll reach a point where we're probably pretty close to reaching a saturation point, where you'll find the best ones will survive and the ones that aren't making good enough beer aren't going to survive. But yeah, I mean, right as we speak, there's another one that's opening up on Lake Street in Traverse City that they're getting to open up in the next few months. And at the same time, you've got all of a sudden all these people who are talking about starting micro distilleries.
I was just going to mention that.
Which is in a new category, but I mean, how many, like, we had the explosion in wineries. We were having the explosion in breweries. Now we're going to have a wave of micro distilleries. Traverse City Whiskey Company is talking about opening up a tasting room on Cass near 14th Street. Yep. And I know that another one is looking at moving downtown, and North Peak with their Civilized Distillery, which is out in Bowers Harbor, they're getting really serious about it. And
It's another tourism draw, John.
Indeed.
In case we're tired of festivals, we can try something different.
Yeah, I mean, I think the region is really poised to kind of become like a drinking and eating destination, if it hasn't already.
We talked to Shorts a couple of weeks ago. They had announced $1.5 million expansion in Bel Air a couple months back, and then more recently a $5 million expansion in their Elk Rapids place, in their brewery there. And I asked him the same question about saturation, and he said, at some point probably, but nationwide we're on a double-digit growth margin right now, and so we're just taking advantage of it while it's hot. And he wasn't too worried about that, because I'd asked him. I said, it's a lot of money to invest in something when there's already a lot of competition out there, and just it's new. He wasn't really worried about it at all.
Well, they know what they're doing. They're so popular. They've got such a big fan base. They roll out a new beer and they have people lining up to get it. They have people who drive from all over the Midwest to go to Bel Air to have a beer, have one of their beers in the pub. So they've figured it out.
I'm not a big beer connoisseur, but the more and more choices we get, the more and more behind I feel, because I don't know what to like and even try, and the thought of spending $4, $5, $6 on a beer that I probably won't like just totally turns me off to begin with. So I need like the little, what do they call the growler, or not the growlers, but the samplers. So it's a long uphill battle for me to find one. John, we'll turn back over to you. Another story, water-related story that you've been working on more recently. The issue with the fish. We've talked about Asian carp for months and months, and if not years, but now we've got a new variety of carp that we are worried about.
Well, it's not new, but it's certainly one that hasn't gotten as much attention as the other two. When you talk about Asian carp, there are a number of strains, a number of varieties, and most of the attention that has been paid is focused on a couple. One, the big head, and the other is the silver. And the reason for that, in the case of the silver, there are a couple. One, they're the ones that spring out of the water when they're disturbed by boat motors or other sounds, and have sometimes collided with people and broken their noses or caused other problems.
Yeah.
They're the sort of the visible symbol of the Asian carp menace. And the big head are the ones that can get as big as 100 pounds and are just really giant fish. And both of them eat plankton. And plankton, is at the base of the food chain. In some cases, little microscopic plants and animals that are just crucial to the entire ecosystem. And the concern is that they're so voracious that if there are enough of them in the Great Lakes, they could just be like vacuum cleaners, eating up the plankton and destabilizing the food web. Well, in the case of another type of fish, the grass carp, that isn't the case, because the grass carp is not a plankton eater. They eat full-grown plants, and so there hasn't been as much concern about them. But a study came out just this week from some scientists at Notre Dame and Central Michigan, a number of other universities, that raised some concerns about them. And what's interesting is that while the big head and the silver carp are illegal now, illegal to possess, that is not the case with grass carp in every jurisdiction. Michigan and Minnesota ban grass carp, but a number of other states, including 5 of the 8 states in the Great Lakes region, do allow them with permits. And the reason is that you'll have homeowner associations around a lake, or maybe some managers of other types of waterways, reservoirs. They've got a real problem with plants, kind of nuisance weeds growing out of control. Maybe they're choking the boat motors. People have that type of thing. So you put some grass carp in there and they will just mow them down. The bad thing is that they don't stop with the plants you don't want. They also eat the plants that we do want.
Gotcha.
And in the Great Lakes, the concern is with wetland vegetation primarily. Wetlands are crucial for spawning fish. They provide habitat for the young fish before they emerge back into the lakes. There are also places where ducks and other waterfowl will nest. And so they're just absolutely essential to the overall environment. And so you don't want grass carp in there eating all that up. Now, what these scientists have discovered is that in recent years they took a look at some data from the years, I think it was '07 through 2012, and found that more than 40 grass carp catches had been reported in the Great Lakes Basin. Now, the only one of the lakes themselves is Lake Erie, where they've been caught. But in some of the inland lakes and some of the rivers, the tributaries that feed them, they have begun to be caught. And another ominous sign was that about half of the ones that were caught and reported were found to be fertile. They could reproduce. Now, what happens in a lot of places where grass carp are legally produced and sold to people for use is they're supposed to be sterilized before they're sold so that they will not reproduce. But apparently some are getting through one way or another. And so what that could signal is that there are already breeding populations of grass carp in the Great Lakes. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but it's cause for concern. Additionally, what this study found is that it's believed that grass carp can survive in any of the 5 Great Lakes. There have been some question about whether the water would be too cold or whether the climate in general would be too cold for Asian carp, but apparently they've concluded that they probably could survive if there's enough food for them to eat. Up at Lake Superior, you wouldn't have as much vegetation as you would, say, in a Lake Erie, but the signs are pointing toward the likelihood that they would do well if they can get in and get a foothold. So it emphasizes the need to be vigilant and to try to avoid that. Now, I spoke with an official with the Michigan DNR who said, it would be nice if all of the Great Lakes states at least could harmonize their policies because right now it's a patchwork. Each state sort of has its own rules, and that can make it a bit confusing. So that's one of the things they're going to be talking about. But it's, I guess the bottom line is just one more reason to have some concerns about Asian carp.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so these carp don't jump.
No, they don't.
How? I don't mean to get too far off track, but you took a picture a couple years ago of the silver carp, and it keeps on coming back. Like I keep on seeing that picture again and again. How does that picture have such a life?
Well, it's the magic of the Associated Press archive. When I took that picture, I know the one you're talking about that shows the carp springing out of the water in the background, and there's one right in the foreground that looks like it's going to hit you in the face, and it almost did hit me. I was down in the St. Louis area a couple of years ago, 2011 now, went down with some researchers just to learn more about the carp and some of the work that they were doing on the rivers where there already are a lot of them. And so I visited some scientific stations at around the Mississippi River down in the St. Louis area and also up on the Illinois River, and went out on boats with scientists to take some pictures. And any time that they activate their electric stun devices to stun fish so that they can pick some up, they go crazy and they spring out of the water. So there are some good photographic opportunities there. I found it was tougher than I thought to get the pictures because by the time you focus on one and shoot, it's back in the water.
Right.
But I got lucky with that one, and it was a good shot. And it's been with the Associated Press, we keep all our photos in an archive, and so we can use them sort of as file photos and use them with subsequent stories. And so that one has proven popular, and you do see it a good bit because it's sort of just sort of as an illustration of what the threat is.
Do you consider yourself a photographer?
An amateur. I do take a number of photos with my stories. Sometimes we have staff or stringer photographers who work with us at the AP. Just recently we had a very nice package about the frozen Great Lakes that involved a lot of photography. The Record Eagle contributed some photos. I took some myself. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune produced a wonderful gallery of frozen ice caves over at the Apostle Islands on Lake Superior. So it's a combination of things, but being up here in Traverse City, in my own outpost, I have had to learn how to take my own photos. I've been to a AP workshop for reporters who are also photographers, and so I've learned a few tricks. But it's I have great admiration for professional full-time photographers because it is an art form unto itself that I just am just scratching the surface to learn about.
Yeah. I think we all know the photo. It's a good one that jumps out at you, literally. Last question I want to ask you about that, John, was you mentioned the DNR would like to get everyone on board in the region. with a policy about the grass carp. But you also said Michigan and 2 other states have policies against them, and it's what the other 5 that don't.
Right.
Is that right? So we're in the minority here. If we want to change the policy, we're not the ones leading the way on that. We're kind of the opposite.
Well, yeah, one of the interesting things about the Great Lakes that we have to keep in mind is that they are not federal waters. There is not a situation where the federal government could come in and impose something like that. The individual states all claim different sections of the Great Lakes and have their own policies about them. An example would be Michigan having its own rules about the state owning whatever might be found on the Great Lakes bottomlands, including shipwrecks, which has raised some controversy over the years. But yes, Michigan and Minnesota are the 2 states that flat out ban the grass carp. Wisconsin, as I understand it, does under most circumstances, although they allow them for research. But the other states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Indiana, Illinois, do allow people to have them and to use them if they get permits, and I'm sure there are conditions that go along with those. But we have to remember that in some of those states, not all of them are in the Great Lakes Basin. You go to southern Illinois, you've gone a long way from the Great Lakes. Same with Ohio, and so the mindset will be different in some of those states.
Lastly, let's turn back over to Pat Sullivan. Pat, you've got the big best of issue coming out today, this weekend.
Out, yeah, Sunday.
Tell us, what's in store for it, and what kind of work really goes into putting that thing together.
It's a big project because we cover such a wide region from the Straits over to Cadillac to Manistee. So we've got an enormous region, and people vote online about their favorite hamburger, best place for a cup of coffee, best meal,
right.
And then it's just a lot of work to put all that together. I think it's really enjoyable to see the finished product. And it gives you, and I think all of us who live up here kind of wind up weekend tourists in our own backyard, heading up to Petoskey for a weekend or down to Manistee. So I think it's a fun thing to have and to be able to read.
I was going to say it's a fun read. I know I'm putting you on the spot. Any idea in terms of circulation? I mean, do you go through more copies of that than others? Do you make more copies? It just seems like a really popular thing that once it's out, I see it everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know. We definitely get a lot more exposure because then the winners put their things up at behind
behind the bar, on the door,
bar, in their restaurant, and so it definitely gets the Northern Express's name out there. I don't know. I'm not up on circulation issues,
Gotcha.
but I wouldn't be surprised if there's more circulation out there.
Yeah. Do you have any idea how many categories or how many nominees? I mean, is it a days and days or months and months long process of going through all that? Because I'm sure there's a ton.
Yeah, no, it's from what I understand, it was a much bigger undertaking before there was an internet, when you had to
do it by hand.
When people were mailing in their ballots and they had to be counted up. It's way easier now than it was then.
Good deal. Well, that comes out this weekend.
Yep.
We'll look for the best of in the Northern Express coming up. Pat Sullivan, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. And John Flesher from the Associated Press. Good to see you as well.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning into the Briefing Room this week. I'm Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio, and we'll see you next time right here on the Briefing Room.